Hey, you Gooshbagz, welcome into the Week 15 or the Semifinals edition of the 2021 Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast. That's right, boys. We only got 2 weeks of fantasy football left, and we are still in it. We're still in it. All of you are still in it to win at least another $10, another $20 even. So keep fighting, you guys who have been eliminated for the past couple weeks. Stay in it because, as we saw this last week, you still have a chance to make money even though you're in the loser's bracket because we had somebody do that this week. But we'll get to that. As always, I am your host, Jason Peck, the commissioner of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League, and I'm still happy, boys. I'm in it for all of my leagues. I know Neil probably doesn't listen to this. Sometimes he does. But I'm still in all 3 of my money leagues, including this one, which is obviously the most important. So I survived. Some of us survived, and we are looking forward to this next week of fantasy football. Guys, so exciting. So exciting. All right, let's move to, at the very top of the show, as always, we do our injuries. So, fortunately, there weren't too many, but there were a few, and they very severely affected Ryo's output and my quarterback's output for this week. But Chris Godwin, unfortunately, tore his ACL, and he's out for the season. He's maybe even out for part of next season. With it happening this late in the year, it's very sad. And then Mike Evans, who has a hamstring injury, he was out for most of the game on Sunday night for the Buccaneers, and he may be out this week as well. Additionally, Leonard Fournette, who was also on Ryo's roster, Mike Evans and Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette also had a hamstring injury, and he got put on IR this week. So Ronald Jones, unfortunately, he's not on the waiver wire because Aaron's had him all season. But Leonard Fournette is out for the rest of the fantasy season. Pat Freiermuth, now this is sad, had a concussion this week. He got hit pretty hard, and I think got pulled out on a stretcher. Him and Donald Parham for the Chargers both got pulled out on stretchers, I believe, but I think they are doing okay. Pat, I think that was his second concussion in the past month or so he may take some time to come back from that just to be safe. And then last but not least, and this is not sad, so I'm not going to restart the sad music, but Julio Jones' hamstring, he got hurt on his game. I think this is his first game back, I believe, from injury, but he practiced today, I think a full practice, so he should be good to go for this next week. Now, away from the sad news, into the glad news. We've got the top scorer in the league this week. Woo-hoo! And it is Aaron, for some reason, who got a goose from one of his players and didn't start a defense. Still ended up scoring the most in the league with 121.54 fantasy points. And I'm pretty sure this week, as I mentioned, literally all of the teams that are out of the playoffs, if you were to add up all those scores, and there's only 4 of them, if you were to add up all those scores, they would have outscored everybody in the playoffs. I don't know if that's probably not true of the 6 people that are in the playoffs, but it seemed like all of their scores were essentially higher than all of our scores. Let me take a look. Let's look at the scoreboard. So yeah, we've got, I guess Buffalo Soldier did save the day. He did have 117 fantasy points this week. He was the one bright spot of the people who made it to the playoffs. Let's see. Yeah, Deshaun's happy endings put up 106, and both players in Ain't No Waller Batgirl and my tight end Ertzwin Eifert put up over 100 fantasy points. And that was a rare occasion. Everybody that was in the playoffs scored under 100 except James. So, anyways, congratulations to Aaron. You got that.
Alexander Hamilton.
All right. When I remember to give you your money, I will give you your money. Congrats. yeah, so let's talk about the matchups that happened this week. It was crazy. We had some crazy. This was like quite possibly just the worst week of fantasy football ever. Week 9 was up there, like in low points scored, but I think this was on Sunday. It was the least amount of touchdowns scored of since like 1991, when there's been at least 10 games on Sunday, 10 or more. Now there were only exactly 10 games on Sunday. Because we had a few get moved due to COVID. And part of the reason that this happened is because there were a lot of players on COVID. So lower scoring games in general. And yeah, I mean our scores reflected it. I mean, let's take my matchup here for example. The More the Merrier took on Rock the Hawk, the underdog story of the More the Merrier. More the Merrier scored 95.06 fantasy points to Rock the Hawks 67 in the playoffs. Team scored 67 fantasy points. The studs on the More the Merrier, we have Jonathan Taylor, as always, putting up 23 fantasy points. And then no other real studs. James Robinson did do pretty good. He had 16 fantasy points. And everybody else was just kind of meh, or even worse than meh, because, I only scored 95 fantasy points, so not that great of a day. In the duds category, I had Tom Brady, who put up 4.76 fantasy points, which, reflecting on it, like, that's probably better, because I have one player that has, that I'm relying on for that Bucks game. And Ryo had three of the players. He had Gronk, he had Mike Evans, and he had Leonard Fournette, and they all sucked because Tom Brady sucked. Also due to injury, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But Leonard Fournette still put up 10 fantasy points. Mike Evans had one catch before he got hurt. So, but and other teams I was bold enough to flex Dawson Knox, which I shouldn't have. He had 5.8 fantasy points. I left Jeff Wilson on the bench, who got me 18.9 fantasy points. So, could have been better, but I pulled out the W. On Rock the Hawk, he did have nobody who had a stud game. He had two players score above 10, and that's Jimmy Garoppolo and Leonard Fournette. And I don't know, Ryo, if you were trying to play a little head games here, because I had George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk, two of the pass catchers, and Jeff Wilson. But I didn't play Jeff Wilson. But two of the pass catchers from San Francisco, and you played San Francisco's quarterback. So I don't know if you were trying to play little head games where I have two of your pass catchers and you have two of my pass catchers for my quarterback. So I don't know if that was going through your head when you picked up Jimmy Garoppolo, but Jimmy G did outscore Tom Brady by 9 fantasy points, so can't be that mad about that start. Leonard Fournette was the only other one above 10 fantasy points. He had 10.2, and he got hurt partway through the game, so he could have been better. But everybody else was basically a dud. Alvin Kamara only had 4.1 fantasy points, and Mike Evans got hurt with 1.9. Gronk only had 3.9 fantasy points, and he played the whole game. Just not a great showing for Rock the Hawk, which is unfortunate, and knocks him out, puts him in the 5th place game. So can't even get that 3rd place money. So I'm sorry, Ryo, but you lost last week, and that's we're both rooting for each other to lose just last week. I hope you win this week. You know what? I'm putting an end to the rivalry for one game here. I hope you win. I get 5th place. Congratulations for my vote of confidence for 5th place. Although you do play Benaya, so we'll have to see. But I just gave away spoilers. We got matchup number 2 here. Buffalo Soldier, Heart of America versus Waddle Baby Waddle Baby Waddle Baby Waddle. And this was a blowout because Buffalo Soldier actually did pretty well this week. He had 117.1 fantasy points to Waddle Baby's 67.88 fantasy points. Now, I'm not necessarily rooting against, let me clarify, I'm not rooting against Benaya to lose. I hope it's a great game and, may the best team win. I'm not specifically rooting against Ryo is mostly what I'm saying. So both of you guys, it's going to be a good matchup, especially since both of you scored around 67 fantasy points this last week. Let's start with Waddle Baby, who did not have a great week. He did have a couple of players, actually, who did better. But that just means that his duds were lower, man. I got to get some liquid in me here. It's Wednesday night. We're getting there. Almost Christmas. Happy holidays, by the way. I know we're getting into it here. But let's see. Antonio Gibson had 15.5 fantasy points. He was the highest scorer on your team. San Francisco's D had 10. That's pretty good. And Devontae Adams had 13, which is all right. So, but in the duds category, you did have quite poor performances from Cordero Patterson, who had 3.3 fantasy points. Joe Mixon, who only had 6.5. And Ryan Suckup, who was worse than a goose. He had one field goal attempt, and he missed it. So, yeah, it was a poor showing from Waddle Baby. On the other side, we've got Pat Mahomes, who was in the studs category with 29.6 fantasy points. We have, for some reason, starting Amon-Ra St. Brown. I guess that makes sense. Your other wide receivers are not favorable. So, Amon-Ra St. Brown scored 19.5 fantasy points. So, that was great. And Dalton Schultz, I'll put him close to that stud category this week with 16.7 fantasy points. In the duds, we have Najee Harris, who put up 3.6. And that's about the only dud on your team. You had a pretty good week. And, you know, other players putting up supporting numbers somewhere between 7 and 15 fantasy points. Just kind of, you know, average, pretty good, but not terrible. So yeah. Congratulations to Buffalo Soldier, Heart of America. You're going on to make it to the next round of the playoffs. Woo! Semifinals, here we go. And Benaya will be playing for 5th place this year. So, good luck. On to the consolation bracket. Now, these next 2 games were to do whatever you can to get out of that toilet bowl. Am I right, boys? So, the first matchup was Deshaun's Happy Endings versus Team IR. And I'm switching your team name back to Team IR because I like that better. We have Deshaun's Happy Endings scored at 106.76 fantasy points to Team IR's 68.84 fantasy points. On Deshaun's Happy Endings, he had that Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford stack that's been monstrous all year. Cooper Kupp at 30.2 fantasy points this week. He was a monster. Devin Singletary had 16.1 fantasy points. And actually, Matthew Stafford didn't do so great. He only had 15.46 fantasy points, but I'm pretty sure that's top 10 for this week because this week sucked for quarterbacks. In the duds category, you did have Devonta Freeman, who only put up 2.9 fantasy points. And that's about it. No other real duds on the team. Some high single digits, but nothing too terrible. On Team IR, he did have Mark Andrews, who scored half of his fantasy points with 30.6, basically offset Cooper Kupp. But then the rest of his team was basically duds. He had Odell Beckham Jr., who put up 1.2, Michael Pittman Jr., who put up 1.2. The juniors matching over here. We have Damian Harris, who... Wait a minute. Do I hear something in the sky? Oh, geese are flying south this time of year. He had 0 fantasy points. He had the goose. And then Russell Wilson put up 4.24 fantasy points. So, not great all around from Team IR. So, Team IR moves down to the toilet bowl playing this week. And Chad's team, Deshaun's Happy Endings, moves out of that. He's playing for 7th and 8th place for this week. So congrats, guys. But by the way, even though this is your last week in the playoff bracket, and you will have a matchup next week, but even though this is kind of the last week that counts, in week 17 we're still giving out $10. So go for that money. Play your optimal lineups anyways. Even if you just log in for a few minutes, throw in your best players and log out, that's fine. You could still potentially get that $10. So, yeah, there's that. The last matchup, this was the highest scoring matchup of the week. It was my tight end Ertzwin Eifert versus Ain't No While Back Girl. Now this team, this once again is to try to stay out of the toilet bowl. So the losing team moves down to the toilet bowl, and unfortunately, Ain't No Waller Back Girl did get knocked down to the toilet bowl with 110.32 fantasy points. It doesn't seem fair, but that's how it is. So, maybe we can switch it up next year. Maybe the 4 players that are not in the playoffs can do like a Royal Rumble, and the top 2 stay out of the toilet bowl, and the bottom 2 go to the toilet bowl, and then the losing player between those 2 is the loser of the toilet bowl. We'll have to think about it. That's an option. Keep your mind open about that change for next year. But that way, both of these teams stay out because they earned, staying out of the toilet bowl. But anyways, under the rules for this year, Ain't No Waller Back Girl unfortunately has to fight for his life down in the toilet bowl. On my tight end Ertzwin Eifert, he had some monster games from players this week. He had Travis Kelce, who put up 36.1 fantasy points, Tyreek Hill, who put up 26.8 fantasy points, and Justin Herbert had a pretty good game with 23.04 fantasy points. Now, the only reason that he only had 121.54 fantasy points is the rest of his players had okay games, but he had Adam Thielen, who didn't play this week, so I can't even drop the goose. He just had 0 fantasy points because he didn't play. And then he didn't play a defense. So his team could have been even better if he had swapped in. He had Miles Sanders on the bench who put up 15.6 fantasy points. So if he put him in, he would have had, 136 instead of 121. Better chance against the waiver wire. So, but overall, great week from my tight end Ertzwin Eifert, despite the fact that I don't like that he did not fill out his lineup. Maybe next year I'll be a little more strict about people filling out their lineups. But as far as I feel like we should give them a loss for. But then again, should the person playing against them do they deserve a win when they don't win with I don't know, with somebody out of the other lineup? I don't know. Them's the breaks sometimes though. But we'll talk about it. I'd like to get everybody more and more active in the league. So that's why I try to pay out. This just drives me nuts because he's not active in the league. Aaron's not super active in the league, but he won the $10 this week anyways, so that's frustrating. But anyway, that's my mini rant. We'll kind of try to iron some stuff out for next year. On Ain't No Waller Backer, we did have Aaron Rodgers, who put up 23.82 fantasy points in the studs category, and Brandon Cooks, who I cannot believe I dropped from my team, had 25.7 fantasy points. He has been great over the last 2 weeks since I dropped him from my team. He could have been a solid staple for me in the playoffs, but unfortunately, I am an idiot. So he'd been playing terrible over the past few weeks. He hadn't been getting the targets with Tyrod Taylor, and now Tyrod Taylor's out, and David Mills has been in, and they have a connection. So that drives me nuts. But them's the breaks, like we said. So we will we'll move forward. That's like we said, unfortunately, in the toilet bowl next week, we've got Team IR and Ain't No Waller Batgirl. And playing for 7th and 8th place, we've got my tight end Ertzwin Eifert and Deshaun's happy ending. So good luck next week, but we will cover those matchups here in a little bit. Before that, though, we have the waiver wire team that would kick all of our asses. Now this, I don't want to spoil it, but they went nuts because the quarterback one and the running back one were both on waivers this week. We have Tyler Huntley, of the week. They were both on waivers. Tyler Huntley put up 35.9 fantasy points in the running back spot. Running back one on the week, Duke Johnson at 25.2 fantasy points. In the running back 2 spot on the waivers, now this was not the number 2 overall, Amir Abdullah put up 13.5 fantasy points. In the wide receiver 1 spot, we have Gabriel Davis, who put up 23 fantasy points. Wide receiver 2 is MVS, who put up 18.9 fantasy points. Hunter Henry put up 22 fantasy points in the tight end spot, and Josh Reynolds put up 15.8 fantasy points in the flex. At the defensive position, we've got the Steelers D, who put up 15 fantasy points, and for the kicker, Kaimi Fairbairn. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I apologize because I'm sure you're listening to this podcast. He had 16 fantasy points. In total, this team would have put up 186 fantasy points. Nobody in our league was within 60 fantasy points of this team. It was monstrous. The waivers have destroyed us once again, and they are 13-2 for the year. Boys, we've got some work to do. Now, on to the wonderful round 2 semifinal matchups for this week. Woo! But first, we've got the matchup predictions from last week. I was 3 for 4. Benaya was 2 for 4. I win again. You guys have only beat me once this year, so you guys suck. I expect you guys to step up your game next year. All of my guests, you need to figure your shit out, and you need to do better next year. You guys are 1-4-2 against me. And you know why I won, Benaya? It's because I switched the pick from picking you to picking James last week. So sad face. I'm sorry. I really apologize to you, Benaya. That's probably why he lost, to be honest, is because I switched. If I hadn't switched, we would have both gotten that one right and tied, but, sorry. Anyways, on to the semifinals. Boys, are you ready? We've got 2 big matchups to get to the championship for next week. Guys, I'm so stoked. Let's start off with semifinal matchup numero uno. We have the More the Merrier versus Hot Digsity Dog. Ooh, I'm gonna beat you this week. All right, let's take a look at these matchups. I have got Tom Brady in the quarterback slot at 20.1 fantasy points. We've got Jonathan Taylor taking on Arizona this week. We've got Jeff Wilson for taking on Tennessee since Elijah Mitchell has been ruled out for this week. They've got the Thursday game. I've got currently DJ Moore in against Tampa Bay, Brandon Ayuk in against Tennessee, and George Kittle in against Tennessee. I'm really relying on the San Francisco team, who has been good recently, so I can't be that mad about it. And I've got James Robinson versus the Jets. He's going to be a monster this week. So I'm still trying to figure out who I'm going to throw in at my wide receivers. A.J. Brown is coming off of the IR this week. I might be playing him instead tomorrow night against San Francisco instead of maybe DJ Moore. DJ Moore is questionable for this week, and I really don't trust him. I don't know. My wide receivers are always a bit of a question mark, so we'll see. But my smash matchups here at the running back position I am stoked about. So, and Tom Brady off of a terrible game, he is going to bounce back, Tom Brady, and he's going to be a monster. I'm so looking forward to that. Antonio Brown's going to be back, which you're probably going to put him into your lineup. Although, I don't know, you got Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't know. We're going to have to see. Russell Gage has been a monster, and he's against Detroit. I don't know, Adam. You're gonna have to figure out what you're gonna do. Clyde Edwards-Helaire versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been terrible against running backs, and so has Houston, and so has Washington. So we'll have to see. Your running back matchups are also very good, similar to mine. You've got Dak Prescott here versus Washington. That should be a good matchup. Like I said, Austin Eckler versus Houston, Zeke versus Washington, Stephon Diggs versus New England, Keenan Allen versus Houston, and Zach Ertz versus Indianapolis. You've also got the Arizona D versus Indianapolis, and Nick Folk. So, also, waivers haven't run, so we haven't had an opportunity to really change our lineups too much. Those will run tonight, so we'll figure that out. But, obviously, I'm picking me to win because that's what I always do, because that's how you do things. So, this should be a good matchup. I'm excited to see. We both kind of got some really good players that have potential to just go nuts. So, if our players go nuts, then, it's going to be a fun one to watch for sure. On to matchup number 2 here. We've got Chubba Hubba Dubba Bubba versus Buffalo Soldier Heart of America. And right now, this is projected to be a low-quality slugfest. Chubba Hubba Dubba Bubba is taking an interesting strategy. He's got Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel both in his lineup. He does have Nick Chubb here in the flex. You've also got... you've got some rough decisions here. Josh Allen here against New England. You've got Hunter Renfrow versus Denver, Devontae Parker versus New Orleans, Dallas Goedert versus the Giants, Nick Chubb versus Green Bay, Dallas versus Washington. That should be good. Justin Tucker, the solid kicker, the most solid kicker in the league, kicker number 3 on the year, just consistent as all get out. On the other side, we've got Patrick Mahomes versus Pittsburgh. That could be a smash matchup. We've got Aaron Jones versus Cleveland. We've got Najee Harris versus Kansas City, Kendrick Bourne versus Buffalo, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, these, I'm assuming, are all going to change because he, picked up 5 players last week and played them, and they all played well. So, I don't know how the heck he does this, but he does this. We've got Dalton Schultz versus Washington, Chris Godwin versus Carolina. You're going to have to figure out what to do with him because he is out. So, you'll have to fill in here. Despite the fact that Chubba Hubba Dubba Bubba is playing 2 running backs from the same team, I'm still going to have to go with him because Buffalo Soldier doesn't really have great matchups this week. So let's see. I don't know. If you throw an A.J. Dillon there instead of Chris Godwin, that would help. I don't know. I'm going to have to go with Chubba Hubba Dubba Bubba to play against me in the finals. As much as I hate rooting for Courts, I think that's what's going to happen here. I'd love to see James take home a victory, but I don't think he's going to pull one out this week. On to matchup number 3. This is for 5th and 6th place. We've got Rock the Hawk versus Waddle Baby Waddle Baby Waddle Baby Waddle. And Waddle Baby has Kyler Murray versus Indianapolis. We got Joe Mixon versus Baltimore. Cordero Patterson versus Detroit. We've got Devontae Adams versus Cleveland. Jamar Chase versus Baltimore. Mike Gesicki versus New Orleans. Antonio Gibson versus Dallas. On the other side of the ball, we have Jimmy Garoppolo versus Tennessee, but we might have a Lamar Jackson back in here. We've got Alvin Kamara versus Miami. We've got Leonard Fournette versus Carolina. Mike Evans versus Carolina. We're going to have to figure out your Tampa Bay situation here because obviously we've got a couple of Tampa Bay questions. But you've got Melvin Gordon here. You've got Mike Williams. You got plenty of people on your bench that you could fill in for. You got a pretty solid bench there, Rock the Hawk. That's why you've had a good year this year. But unfortunately, the breaks didn't happen in your favor here in the playoffs. So, Deontay Johnson versus Kansas City. You've got Rob Gronkowski versus Carolina. You've got David Montgomery versus Seattle. Buffalo D versus New England. And Harrison Butker. I mean, with your current lineup, you're projected to lose quite handedly, Rock the Hawk, but you've got some fill-ins. I don't know. I think Jamar Chase is going to bounce back against Baltimore. Jamar Chase is going to be a beast. Baltimore's secondary just sucks right now. So, yeah, I'm going to have to go with Waddle Baby to take this one. And I don't think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a blowout. He's just got too good of matchups this week, and I agree. I think Rock the Hawk's gonna have a rough time and finish in 6th place on the year. Now, on to the not toilet bowl. These people are in the clear, out of the toilet bowl. Deshaun's happy endings versus my tight end Ertz and Eifert. Now, like I said, while this matchup may not be for much, you could win $10. So keep playing, boils. You've got on Deshaun's happy endings, Matt Stafford versus Minnesota, Saquon Barkley versus Philadelphia. We've got Devonta Freeman versus Cincinnati, CeeDee Lamb versus Washington, Cooper Kupp versus Minnesota. That's going to be the Rams should go ham against Minnesota. So I think the Matt Stafford Cooper Kupp stack here is going to be really big. We've got Kyle Pitts versus Detroit. We've got Devin Singletary versus New England. Yeah, I like that lineup this week. We've got, on the other side, on my tight end Ertz, we've got Justin Herbert versus Houston. Whew. Javonte Williams versus Vegas. Nyheim Hines versus Arizona. DK Metcalf versus Chicago. Tyreek Hill. You should throw in Ronald Jones here. Aaron, check your lineup and put some people in. Because you could throw in Ronald Jones instead, or Miles Sanders. You've got some good running backs on your bench. Adam Thielen is going to be back. Travis Kelce versus Pittsburgh, and Tyreek Hill versus Pittsburgh. They're both on the COVID list right now, so they may or may not play. If Kelce and Hill are both out, then I think you're going to have a really tough time winning. So I'm going to go Deshaun's happy endings. Because I think, number one, I think the stack is going to be good, and yeah, I don't think that my tight end Ertz is going to change his team, so he might not have a defense, and he might not have either Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce if they don't get back from the COVID list. In the toilet bowl, this is potentially the biggest game of the week, because this is where fortunes are made and dresses are to be worn in the draft next year. We've got Team IR versus Ain't No Waller Back Girl. Team Ain't No Waller Back Girl has Aaron Rodgers versus Cleveland. That's going to be a smash. James Conner versus Indianapolis. They have a pretty good run defense. Dalvin Cook versus the Rams is going to do well. Deebo Samuel versus Tennessee. They also have a good run defense, so I don't know if Deebo Samuel is going to do well. We have Brandon Cooks versus the Chargers. We have that's going to be good, I think. Well, the Chargers actually have a good pass defense. Foster Moreau versus Denver. Amari Cooper versus Washington. That's kind of solid. Pretty solid lineup here. On the other side, we've got Russell Wilson versus Chicago. Russell Wilson has not looked like himself. Josh Jacobs versus Denver. We've got Damian Harris versus Buffalo. Justin Jefferson versus the Rams. Michael Pittman versus Arizona. That's going to be tough. Mark Andrews versus Cincinnati might make up for everybody else on your team. OBJ versus Minnesota is also going to be a pretty good matchup. It got better towards the end there, but I think the core of your team is not enough to really overcome Team Ain't No Waller Back Girl. So I predict that Team IR is going to lose the toilet bowl and have to draft in a dress for next year. And we may have to look into that rule, cross-dressing. While, some people look down upon that, I don't necessarily agree with that. But seeing as I don't think any of us cross-dress, it is an interesting style of choice for the draft next year. So good luck, everybody. I'm looking forward to next week, getting on here next week and bragging to all of you about how I'm in the finals and I beat the number 1 seed to get into the finals. 5 seeds taking on the 1 seed, and the 6 seed is taking on the 2 seed. So these are going to be some big matchups this week. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this all plays out, and I'm going to be on the edge of my seat on Christmas, the day after Christmas, and the Monday after Christmas, because it's going to be a great weekend. I'm very much looking forward to it. You guys, good luck next week, and I'll catch y'all later. Thanks for joining, boyos. I'm loving it. Woo! I'll see you guys.